The speed of the floodwaters that claimed the lives of his twin children came as a shock to Ryan Rigney.
We didn't even get a notification that there was a flood coming.
The reason? Cell service had gone down in parts of Humphreys County, meaning phones throughout the area received none of the National Weather Service's 4 flood emergency alerts.
If we had a better warning to get out of there, our babies would still be here with us.
Adding further complications, the unexpected speed of the rising water.
Like a dam broke, it just rose, it rose quickly, and maybe a dam breaking would be a sudden rush, but it was a quick rise of water in town.
So how did that happen? Yes, 17 inches of rain fell, but flood victims describe it as alarmingly fast. News 4 Investigates learned investigators were looking closely at this stretch of railroad. You can see Trace Creek runs underneath the railroad. Well, the swift water rescue team tells us water may have pooled behind where the railroad stands on high elevation, almost like a levee. And when the earth beneath the railroad broke through, it may have sent torrents of water suddenly flooding anything downstream.
It was a sudden rush. It came quickly.
Days later, Sheriff Chris Davis asked News 4 Investigates to ride with him to see what we'd reported on up close.
What did you think when you were driving here?
Why is there water here now?
From the sheriff's pickup, you're able to see from the ground what our drone captured from above. It's why, the sheriff believes, so many people died.
This is what bothers me. Did these people die because of that rush of water, or was it the gradual rise?
There was no gradual rise to this. Up in one of these flood areas, it went from bone dry to waist deep water in somewhere probably less than 15 minutes.
Days after the flood, CSX Railroad continued the repairs to the rock basin that elevates the railroad high above Highway 70. Drone 4 discovered on the day of the flood, Trace Creek was swollen with 17 inches of rain, held back only by the railroad acting as a kind of levee, until it broke. Look, in 2 sections, water rushed through, leaving only the railroad itself standing.
And it just rose so quickly.
Heading directly for Felicia Wilcox's home.
Because I've been whitewater rafting, it reminded me of that.
It was blown out up here as well.
After hearing so many flood victims were caught by surprise, the sheriff's office examined both satellite maps and the terrain where the surge rushed through.
This is not just a backflow of water that's caused this right here. That had to be some force and some power.
Our findings were then backed up by actual videos capturing the surge of water. One man's surveillance video shows that the water swallowed his house in under 12 minutes, trapping he and his family.
It was so quick, like you think you got enough time to get in your truck and leave, and you don't. And you think you got enough time to go from my house to Main Street, which is probably, 200-300 yards, if that. You just don't have time.
And this camera showed the same in downtown Waverly. The force of the water strong enough to carry a car and send a roof floating by, all in just minutes.
The water still was rising so fast that my husband actually had to bust out the back window just to let the water flow through, and so we wasn't trapped in there.
Next, News 4 Investigates uncovered that county officials knew the creek would likely flood. Look at this. 10 years earlier, a report commissioned by Humphreys County officials identified that creek was one of the local hazards for potential deadly flooding. The creek has long been clogged by vegetation and gravel, making it prone to flooding. But look, the report reads, no action was ever taken.
There will be people that say, you knew that this was going to happen. You knew that this could be this bad. Why didn't you clear that creek?
There are a lot of factors that have impeded any progress toward what we know is the major cause of this chronic flooding.
To clear the creek, the county would have had to request permits from the State Department of Environment and Conservation. The state confirms no permit was ever pulled.
TDEC has said no one ever came to us for permits. Nobody asked for this. Why didn't you ask?
The permits are limited in scope.
That's where County Executive Jesse Wallace says the problem truly lies, that the permits are so limited they couldn't have made substantial clearing. For example, the county says before 1980, they used bulldozers to clear the creek, but the state permits now don't allow heavy machinery in the creek itself.
Regulatory restrictions are the biggest problem that we have.
News 4 Investigates repeatedly emailed and called TDEC, but our requests for an interview were denied. The state agency writing in part, there are many mitigation efforts, such as removing trash and woody debris by hand or chainsaw that would not require any sort of permit. But Wallace says that would have only made a dent in the problem that has already proven to be deadly. Finally, everything we've shown you is now prompting the Army Corps of Engineers to launch a 2-year study of the creek, hoping to find a way to prevent a future catastrophe.
CSX Railroad is being sued by 10 families. They accuse the company of negligence, resulting in a surge of water heading toward town.
Now, if all this sounds familiar, it's because our chief investigative reporter, Jeremy Finley, has been uncovering these details since last August.
Jeremy, your reporting is cited in this lawsuit.
It is, Tracy. It cites how we used a drone to show exactly where the surge of water came from. Now, this lawsuit claims CSX Railroad not only failed to clear debris that caused that backup, but that they knew the water was rising behind their raised tracks and failed to warn the town.
Everything was taken from her.
Since the flood last August, Michelle Feliciano is haunted by her 7-year-old daughter's final words.
I constantly remember hearing my daughter's last call out for me, and I couldn't get her.
Feliciano joined 9 other families in announcing they're now suing CSX Railroad and a landowner, saying the surge of water that killed their loved ones wasn't an act of nature.
This was a man-made tidal wave. That's right, man-made tidal wave that came into this town, changing the lives of everyone forever.
The lawsuit follows a series of News 4 investigations where drone footage revealed how water burst through raised earth after building up behind CSX railroad tracks, acting as a kind of levee. Now, this lawsuit claims the railroad failed to clear debris from their culvert at Trace Creek, essentially clogging the creek and backing up behind their tracks. And when the water burst through, sent a torrent of water rushing into the town.
We do believe that there was negligence, and we do believe that this was preventable.
In a statement to News 4 Investigates, CSX Railroad wrote in part, CSX track and related infrastructure is maintained and regularly inspected in accordance with CSX policies. But this isn't the only time CSX has been criticized for creating flooding. In New York State, you can see the debris that's washed up behind a CSX bridge, prompting criticism from state officials that it's partly to blame for flooding in that region. Back in Waverly, the lawsuit seeks $450 million in damages.
It's about justice. That's what we're really seeking here, is justice.
We also attempted to reach James and Sherry Huey, landowners who are also being sued, accused of allowing CSX to keep debris on their land that helped to clog the culvert that day. But we were unable to reach them by our deadline. Tracy.
On the day the head of FEMA towards flood-ravaged Waverly, WSMV4 Investigates has uncovered a potential flooding threat once again outside that town. Since the day 20 people drowned, we have been investigating why residents describe a surge of water from Trace Creek that they believed caused the deaths. That's why our chief investigative reporter, Jeremy Finley, actually waded into Trace Creek to see it for himself. Jeremy is here with us tonight. So, Jeremy, what were you looking for?
Okay, so here's what we were looking for, Tracy. We wanted to see if the creek was still clogged with debris. Now, to understand why, you got to go back to 2021 and drone 4 footage that we've shown you several times, where Trace Creek backed up and flooded over the railroad tracks, ultimately breaking through raised land and surging the water towards the town. So why did that water back up? Well, a lawsuit claims that CSX Railroad failed to clear the culvert of debris before the flood. So we returned to the creek and that culvert, and what we found has flood victims worried that another deadly flood could easily happen again.
What Jessica Mallard saw when she opened the back door
It was crazy how quick the water just started coming out of nowhere.
was nearly as scary as seeing floodwaters halfway up the windows of Eastbrook Animal Clinic last August.
It was terrifying because it was so high outside. I'm like, if any of these windows break, like it's just gonna suck in here and I don't know what I'm gonna do.
The clinic is just down Highway 70 from Trace Creek. When the surge of water broke through, it was directly in the water's path.
I cried for a long time. It's hard not to.
So when WSMV4 Investigates showed the clinic staff what we found in the creek, this was their reaction.
It's terrible. Like it's gonna happen again if they don't get that out.
I'm gonna drop it in the water.
I took our cameras into the creek.
Okay, I'll be right back.
Where the water runs underneath a railroad culvert. It's right here that a class action lawsuit claims CSX Railroad allowed various debris to clog its culverts, creating significant blockage to the flow of Trace Creek. New photos obtained by WSMV4 Investigates from the day of the flood shows the water pooled behind the railroad with Highway 70 on the other side. This is before it broke through. This is after. The water washing over the highway and heading towards town, almost like a levee break. All that damage, again, blamed on a clogged culvert. So when we returned to the creek this month, roughly 100 yards from the culvert, this is what we found. A mountain of debris on the creek bed, including a massive tire and a pile of limbs, trunks, and branches. People living downstream worry if there's another heavy rain, all this will be washed once more to clog the culvert.
If you get one tree washed, crossways of that, we're done. It builds up again.
And there's more. The creek is full of rock and gravel, and it's now piled up underneath the culvert. You can see it's cleared here, but look right next to it. Much of the opening is now covered by it, limiting how much water could pass through. It's piled so high that I can stand on top of it and touch the culvert.
You can't leave that in the creeks like that.
Today, we took all of this to the top administrator of FEMA.
We went back in the creek and we found that there is a good amount of debris still in that creek. Is that a solution to preventing flooding, is going through these creeks and dredging them out?
You know, I don't know the specifics on the creeks here. I would have to defer to your state and local officials to give you a better answer on what the specifics of the nature of the problem is here.
So we did just that and asked the director of the State Department of Emergency Management.
So the concern is that if we get another rain, that's just going to push all that debris up into there.
The creek needs to be cleaned out, right? So there are places where it's clean, where homeowners, where it has easier access. We'll take a look at how we organize that and help the community get Trace Creek cleaned out.
We begin tonight with new video that shows the surge of floodwater that's blamed for so many deaths in Waverly. It broke through in more locations than previously thought. The discovery of that video comes as the town prepares to mark a grim milestone. This Sunday will be 1 year since the deadly flooding that killed 20 people. Our chief investigative reporter, Jeremy Finley, continues to look at how this disaster happened. Jeremy.
Marius, we've now obtained never-before-seen video from someone who documented where the water broke through a berm that day. And it shows why there are lingering concerns that it could happen again.
Hey, the railroad tracks are gone.
That's the moment Scott Montero realized something had gone terribly wrong in Waverly.
It was surreal. It was surreal. It was shocking.
The graduate of Waverly Central High School had returned with his wife to check on family and record the aftermath of the flood. That's when they came across the berm on which the CSX Railroad stood, right along Highway 70. But the land beneath had washed away.
It was just simply gone. There was nothing left of it at all, and the tracks were dangling there in the middle of the air.
Since the flood, TEMA says debris has been removed from the creek. It remains to be determined how that massive pile we discovered ended up at that location or when it will be cleaned up.